I gave a handout last week, and we really got through everything but the outline, so I just copied the outline again. Now where we are is we're right at this interlude and the seventh seal, like at letter D, right in the middle of the page. That's where we are.
Okay.
And you remember that we've been talking about Revelation as, oh John, I was supposed to tell you that we've...
You're on, buddy.
Okay, all right. So we've started God to Jesus, sometimes to the angel, to John, and then to the people. That's the trajectory of the Revelation itself. We talked about that this is an apocalypse. It's John writing to his people. And Dia was saying something to me earlier. It made me realize it's important that we recognize that in the genre of apocalyptic, that we have to remind ourselves that we are not in the Pauline theology. We're not in the idea that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. It's not that that's not so, but for the apocalyptic writer, he's saying there are good guys and bad guys. And the faithful are the good guys. Now they've been persecuted, they've suffered a lot of stuff, but that's because the bad guys have done it to them. And they've been oppressed. And they've been asked, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. That's their job. So it's all these dramatic things like the stars falling to the earth and hills and all of that collapsing on people. That kind of thing is happening, but it's going to happen to the bad guys. It's the kings and the magnates and the soldiers and people that are evil who, if you notice, they're the ones fleeing to the mountains. But the people of faith are being held up. They're being asked, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. So let's keep that in mind. When we read about all these dramatic, terrible things happening, they are aimed at the bad guys. And God is vindicating the saints and confronting evil. And remember that we said this is a revelation singular, and who is it a revelation of? Jesus. And Jesus, we said, comes in many guises, right? And we talked about where's Waldo, and the idea that as we read the book, we're to keep looking for Jesus. Where's Jesus? How does he show up? What role does he play? How is he showing up? And we got to the place where we've met him as Son of Man in chapter 1. We've met him as the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion of Judah, who shows up as the Lamb of God, and it is he who is found worthy to open the seals. And as we saw the scroll with the 7 seals, and we saw the Lamb of God is the one opening those seals. And we had gotten through the 6th seal, we had gotten through the interlude where we talked about the 144,000 and the multitude too great to number. And so we noticed that it's not that there will be 144,000 in heaven, and unfortunately, Tom, you're 144,001. Sorry about that. You know.
Well, isn't there an outer heaven that you can?
But that's not the point. That's not the way it works, because verse 9, chapter 7, verse 9, after this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could number. And they're from all tribes and peoples and languages and nations, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, robed in white, with palm branches, like Palm Sunday, in their hand. Salvation belongs to our God. God is the vindicator. God is the Savior. God is the deliverer. And so this is where we are at this point. And we have this reference. Who are these people dressed in white? Well, Sir, I don't know, you know. And the answer is, they are those who have come out of the great ordeal, who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And then we're told they'll hunger and thirst no more. The sun won't strike them, nor any scorching heat. The Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will guide them to springs of living water, waters of life, living springs. Might be a good name for a church somewhere. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So we've had the 6 seals open, we've had the interlude. Now let's remember what happened when the first 4 seals, what happened? Who showed up? The horsemen, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And then the 5th seal opened, and there were the martyrs crying out, "How long, O Lord? How long, O Lord?" And then the 6th seal opened, and there was all that stuff you were talking about. All this stuff of the crashing, the sun going dark and the moon going red and the stars crashing to the earth. This dramatic scene. So, we're right ready to get the 7th seal open, but let's remember this for a moment. You are the 4 horsemen. So kind of put your feet together and get your feet going. You guys in the middle, you're the martyrs going, "How long, O Lord? How long, O Lord?" You guys just beat the chairs next to you. You are the guys, things are falling to the earth. Whoa. Keep the feet down. How long, O Lord? And the 7th seal is open. The 7th seal is open and there's silence. Silence is our response to awe. The 7th seal has been opened and the very universe stops. It's silent for a half hour. Think about how hard it is for us to be silent for a minute. The whole universe stops for a half hour. Talk about centering prayer. And the 7th seal opens another series of 7s. And you begin to see how the book works. This series of 7s. We have a series, we have interludes, we have another series of 7s, we have interludes, and finally at the end we don't have any interludes, we have just the dramatic conclusion of the book. Now we encounter 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets are given to them. And another angel with a censer, a thurifer of incense comes along, and the incense represents the prayers of the saints going up into heaven. And so we're told in chapter 8, verse 5, "Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, threw it on the earth, and there were peals of thunder and rumblings and flashes of lightning and earthquakes." We're being set up for something very dramatic here. The 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets make ready to blow. And then the first 4 angels will blow, just like the 4 horsemen earlier. The first 4 angels blow. And as they blow, something happens. A third of the earth is burned up. Second angel blows trumpet. A third of the sea becomes blood. Third angel, a third of the rivers and springs of water go bitter. And the 4th angel blows, and a third of the sun and moon and stars are darkened. These things are meant to simulate the plagues of the Exodus. they're not identical, but they kind of point back, they recall for us how plagues happen, like the sea turning to blood is like the Nile turning to blood, that kind of thing. The fifth angel blows a trumpet, and what we end up with is a plague of locusts. Now, these locusts recall the prophet Joel, and this is also typical of the book of the Revelation. Many of the images that come up here are borrowing or drawing from, building on things that we've encountered in the Hebrew Bible. In this case, the prophet Joel, who talks about this army of locusts coming in. And of course, the whole thing about locusts is when you have a drove of locusts come in, they basically devour everything. And so what's left is pretty much nothing. And so that's the image that's been painted here. The locusts come. And again, that's one of the plagues that we're reminded of. Now, I want to say a little bit more about this fifth seal, because it's a good place to say there are people who interpret this in a different way. And there are literalists and people who try to say, oh, this is talking about 2025. It had no reference way back then, but now it means something. In verse 7, it says, chapter 9, verse 7, in appearance the locusts were like horses equipped for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold, their faces like human faces, hair like a woman's hair, teeth like lion's teeth, iron breastplates, noise of the wings like chariots and horses rushing into battle. Hal Lindsey, the late great Planet Earth author, he said he was at a conference one time and somebody raised their hand and said, I know what that is. He said, what? He said, that is an Apache attack helicopter. He said, yeah, like, why do you see a human face? Because, you know, the windshield of the helicopter, you see the face, and the guy with the helmet and the microphone, you know, he's got a helmet on. The helicopter has metal, you know, armament on it. It's got Stinger missiles. And it looks like hair. You know, the rotor blade going looks like hair. And it makes this terrible noise. That's an attack helicopter. Any questions? No.
But how we know it's really drones?
It's a good point. And again, see, this is the point of, if you read the book and try to kind of put a round peg in a square hole, if you keep trying to make something mean something in our day and age, but think it had no point of reference in the ancient world, this is how we get messed up. And then Janet makes the point, well, we wouldn't even use attack helicopters anymore. We'd use drones. And drones don't have human faces. So, you know, the image that Hal Lindsey comes up with becomes passé, becomes irrelevant. But again, I don't go down that rabbit hole. I think we need to avoid that rabbit hole. But I want to remind you that there are people who go down that rabbit hole. Yes, Tom?
I know I'm jumping maybe ahead or somewhere on getting ready to go down the rabbit hole. What about the Antichrist? You know, are you going to cover that? Or
the Antichrist is not in this book at all. The Antichrist is in the Johannine epistles, the letters of John. There is no reference to Antichrist here. Now, if by Antichrist you mean something specific, if by Antichrist you mean those who are against Christ, in that sense we can say, yeah, the Antichrist.
No, I was thinking like that, you know, they talked about a leader of the world who's going to be the Antichrist.
Right.
You know.
And we'll get to that in chapter 13.
Okay.
So but I want to avoid that phrase Antichrist, because that is a technical term that, again, takes us down a rabbit hole. And that's That's not what's going on here. Again, Hal Lindsey and LaHaye and Jenkins and people like that have made a lot of money writing books about the Antichrist. And
I want to correct the Apache helicopter story. In my experience, it's the fastest air ambulance from the Dayton Air Show to Miami Valley Hospital with the patient on it. The fastest way to get help.
good.
I have a fundamental question. You probably covered this in session 1. But the 7 churches, the 7?
Yeah, 7 churches.
I'm assuming, since we're drawing on a lot of stuff from the Old Testament, that they were basically they were synagogues first. They were the core there was Jewish people that had accepted Christ. Is that correct?
All right. Yeah. There's a lot going on here. Think about when Paul would establish churches, and Ephesus was one of the and all these churches he established. What he would do is go to synagogues and try to tell the story of Jesus in the synagogue. Some people would say, "We get it." Other people would throw him out.
Right.
Second thing he'd do is he was a tent maker, and he'd talk to his people. As they're making tents, he would tell the story of Jesus. Some people would be intrigued and want to know more. And then the third thing is he would go out in the streets, the way other philosophers did in the Greco-Roman world, and he would tell the story of Jesus, and some of the people there would say, "We want to hear more." And so that's how he would, in those 3 places, he'd get people together. Some were Jews, some were what are called God-fearers, which are Gentile people who who attended synagogue and they worshiped, but what they didn't do is they didn't get circumcised, they didn't eat kosher, they weren't Jews and they didn't follow Jewish tradition, but they worshiped the Jewish God.
Right.
And so they were called God-fearers, but they were Gentiles. And so you've got a mix of Gentiles and Jews in these Pauline churches. And remember, early Christianity is for lack of a better word, a Jewish reform movement. I mean, Jesus was a Jew. He acted like a Jew. He went to synagogue. He did what Jews do. And the early apostles were Jews. And so there's a lot of Judaism that comes into early Christianity. When they talk about the scriptures, we don't have a New Testament yet. They're talking about the Hebrew Bible, and more specifically, the law and the prophets, the Torah and the prophets. So this is what is being built on by the early Christians here. So you're right, the churches have a mix. The other thing to remember is he's not just borrowing imagery from the Hebrew Bible. He's also borrowing imagery from the Greco-Roman world, as we shall see. But a lot of these images are not just biblical images. They can be images from the Greco-Roman world. So, good thought there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for these questions. I'd rather be talking about what you want to know than just...
When you talk about making the references back from the Old Testament, if these Gentiles, they didn't know anything about it, so how would they understand?
Well, the thing is, if they're attending the churches and they're God-fearers, they have heard the stories. Also, the stories are being talked about as in worship. And they might not know, it's just like all of us, we know our Bibles better and worse. And so some of us, we hear an image and it goes over our heads. Others go, I've heard that before. Or I recognize that. So people knew it at different levels. They had different depth of knowledge of the scriptures. But it's not like these things were just completely over their head. They knew stuff about the Exodus. They knew stuff because early Christianity is building on the Hebrew Bible and the narratives, and early Christians are, again, I don't want to get too far off task, but they're building on the Hebrew Bible and the stories and things, and the prophets, where they're connecting Jesus to various traditions and prophecies and stuff. Now, we can argue about whether that's valid or not, but they did that. And so if you went to a synagogue that had evolved into a Christian congregation, or you went to someone's house where the early Christians met, you're hearing the stories being interpreted through a Christian lens, but you hear the stories. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just like we read the Old Testament every Sunday in church.
And we often read it through a Christian lens.
Yes.
Yeah, it's often the lesson was chosen because it sort of resonates with the gospel text or something. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we get then to the sixth angel, and he blows his trumpet, and we got 4 angels who have been bound, and they are now being told that they are unbound. Release them. And so these 4 angels are released, and now I should point out, these are not good angels. These have been bound. They've been held back. So now they're being released, and if you notice what they're about to do, they're about to wreak havoc for a time, 2 times, and a half time, or 42 months, or 1,260 days. The numbers keep repeating. It's all the same amount of time. And that 3.5 is meant to be the limit that God places on, it's a restriction on evil. It's like, evil may have its day, and it may run its course for 3.5 years. But, and in years it's symbolic here, but the idea is, if 7 is the perfect number, the whole number, the complete number, God is saying, you don't even get past halfway. You know? So God is still sovereign, God is still Lord, evil will have its restriction. Okay, so we've had 6 angels blow 6 trumpets, and bad things have happened, and then suddenly we have an interlude. You see the pattern. And now we have an interlude. There's an angel who comes around with a little scroll. He's got a little tiny scroll in his hand. And he shouts, and 7 thunders sound. And 7 thunders sound. He's about to write something. That is, John the seer is about to write what he's just heard. The 7 thunders have been, it's been a voice. It's been a holy voice. And he's about to write what he heard. But the angel says, nope. Seal up what the 7 thunders said. Don't write it down. So there he's being told certain things are too holy to write down. Certain things remain a divine mystery. You can't write that down. And so he's told to let that be. And then we're warned or prepared in verse 7. In the days when the 7th angel is to blow his trumpet, the mystery of God will be fulfilled as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So notice how we're moving closer and closer to that moment of vindication, of triumph. Now he says, eat this scroll, take it and eat it, because it's going to be bitter in your stomach, but it'll be sweet in your mouth. So it'll taste good, but it's going to upset your stomach. It's going to be tough, but you must prophesy about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. So the seer is being given hard work to do. It's bitter sometimes, but he's being called to do it. as a reminder to us that sometimes our tasks as the faithful are. Sometimes they're good and sometimes they're tough. In chapter 11, we encounter two witnesses. And these two witnesses are kind of interesting. They come and they measure the temple of God. Now, the idea of measuring something is, we think of measuring like you measure twice, you cut once, the idea, right? Isn't that right? Measure twice, cut
Unless
once.
it's your finger.
Yeah, unless your finger. Yeah. But in this case, measuring the temple is really about judging the temple, evaluating the temple, confronting the temple with its corruption, what's good and bad about it. It's evaluating the temple. And so these witnesses have come to evaluate the temple, and they are granted authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, wearing sackcloth. Sackcloth is the garb of the prophet during a time of persecution or a time of mourning. So these two witnesses are given the power to prophesy, but it's in a time of difficulty. That same period of time, that 3.5 period of time, that represents the time when evil is in control. These are described as two olive trees and two lampstands that stand before the earth. Now that echoes some material that goes back to the time when the temple was being rebuilt, when after the destruction of the temple, after the Babylonian exile, when the Israelites had come back to Jerusalem and they were rebuilding the temple. So it's actually the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. It's the days of Zerubbabel and Joshua. And so often one reference here that's suggested is that the two witnesses are Zerubbabel and Joshua. It's kind of a reference back to them. But this is apocalyptic literature. And another possibility of the two witnesses is that there are two figures in the Bible that never died, that just were taken up into heaven without death. Enoch and Elijah. Enoch and Elijah. Enoch is in that long line of genealogy in Genesis with all these people living to be 900 years old, and suddenly Enoch lives to be, catch this, 365 years. Any recognition of that number, and he is taken up into heaven and walked with God. All the other people are described as they live and they die and but not Enoch. He's taken up into heaven. And then the other one is Elijah, of course, the chariots of fire, and he was taken up into heaven and he gave his mantle to Elisha. So a prophet and one of the pre-patriarch. These two figures show up in apocalyptic literature as people who have been up in heaven, hanging out, watching, observing, and kind of being held back until a time will come when they are to return and tell the story or write something and present it. Maybe they've been in heaven taking notes about everything that's going on. But so some of the ancient apocalypses are in the name of Enoch or Elijah. And so no surprise there that that's another possibility for who these two witnesses could be. The point is, we could also say, well, the two witnesses are the law and the gospel, or the Torah and the prophets, the law and the prophets. There are different ways to process this, and it's a good reminder that like all biblical tradition and texts, there are layers. And it's not like if we've heard one sermon on a text, well, that exhausted that. We don't need to hear that one again. But rather, every time we hear it, what's the song say? Those who, I love to tell a story, for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. It's because there's always another layer of meaning. So that's another thing going on here. Layers of meaning. Well, eventually, a beast comes up from a bottomless pit, makes war on the two witnesses, and kills them. And their dead bodies lie in the street that is prophetically, it says, called Sodom and Egypt. Sodom, you remember, is that paradigm of a wicked city, and Egypt was where idolatry reigned. And so, again, those are symbolically named places for idolatry and evil. And so, 3.5 days, these people gaze at their dead bodies. They don't allow them to be placed in a tomb, but after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God enters them, and they stood on their feet again. And a voice says, "Come up here." And they go up to heaven in a cloud. So, again, the witnesses are faithful, they are killed, but like the martyrs, they will be vindicated. They are raised back to life. And we have a harbinger in this text of that coming to pass. And then in chapter 11, verse 15, the seventh angel blows the trumpet. And here's the proclaimed announcement. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders, you remember we met them way back in chapter 4. The 24 elders fall on their faces before the throne of God, and they sing, "Your wrath has come, the time for judging the dead, for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and all who fear your name." This, remember, how long, O Lord, how long, O Lord? Well, right here. Your wrath has come, the time for judging and rewarding your servants, the prophets, the saints, and all who fear your name. So this is the beginning of the vindication. We're in that transition period. God's temple in heaven is open. The Ark of the Covenant is seen within the temple. And notice there are flashes of lightning, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and hail. Very much like the noises we heard a little bit earlier. Well, now we have a couple of interlude stories. One is chapter 12. So let me pause. We're coming up on kind of a transition. Any comments, questions about these 7 angels and 7 trumpets?
When you talked about it, it reminded me of part of the finale to Hallelujah.
The Hallelujah chorus.
And all of that, the whole thing.
Handel's Messiah.
Handle, that's the word I was looking
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
The chorus is just one little piece.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminded you of that, but
yeah.
you didn't stand up. You're supposed to stand up for the Hallelujah.
I'm not the
chorus.
king, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So,
This is right before we get to the Amen.
Well,
Pastor
yeah.
Eric,
The ladies just want to know, according to your reading of Revelation, should they set up for linger longer or not?
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I'd say yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh man. It's
It's
just
too good to
It's just
not
no,
keep going.
no respect.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
respect. Okay, chapter 12. we encounter an image here. Let's see. Yeah, I want to. Somebody read that. Who will read that? Kay, will you read chapter 12, the first few up through verse 6?
Sure. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days.
Okay. And then pick up, Dia, if you will, with 13, verse 13.
So when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to her place where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. Then from his mouth the serpent poured water like a river after the woman, to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman. It opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon was angry with the woman, and went off to make war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus.
Okay, thank you. So this is a story of a woman who's about to give birth to a child, and a dragon, the dragon, is waiting there to kind of catch the child as it's born and destroy it. But notice what happens. The mother is able to give birth, but then these rivers come along and whisk the child away to safety, and the dragon is left holding nothing. And so he then just says, all right, fine, and he goes and makes war against her children, and we're told that her children are the faithful. Now, several things to say here. One is that this is an example of Greco-Roman story. There was a story of Apollo and Python. The story of Apollo and Python is a very similar story. Zeus had come down to earth and had relations with a woman. She gives birth to Apollo, and up in heaven, Hera's not very happy, and so she sends this python to go, which is like a dragon-like serpent, to go and destroy this child. But Poseidon whisks the child away to safety, and he grows up, and then Apollo eventually returns and slays Python. That was an ancient Greco-Roman story that people would have been familiar with, like, maybe like we're familiar with, Harry Potter stories or Star Wars stories or something like that. They would have known those stories. And so they would have recognized some of the tropes that show up in this story, some of the images. Now, in the middle of that, we have verse 7 through 12 kind of breaks that story with a reference to Michael. Michael, one of the archangels, is normally depicted as sort of the head of God's army of angels. And so Michael is suddenly battling the dragon, And we're told that he is thrown down. Now, who is this dragon we've been talking about all this time? Verse 9. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Now, what we've had is a cosmic conflict. Michael against this dragon up in heaven. This war's been going on. This is the only place in Jewish or Christian literature where a heavenly battle between Michael and Satan is described. Well, the dragon is kicked out of heaven, driven down, he and his angels, those that have backed his coup, and so they're now on earth. And we heard the rest of the story where he's trying to destroy the woman, and none of that works out. So the dragon, we've finally been told who this dragon is. And what the writer has done is said, remember the tempter that we met in Genesis? And remember the accuser that we met in Job, called Satan? And remember the devil that tempted Jesus? All that's the same figure, we're being told. That for John, that figure is this dragon. It's all rolled up in one. So for John, all of this has come together. And then we get to chapter 13. Where the dragon takes his stand on the sand of the seashore, and then we get two beasts show up. A beast from the sea and a beast from the land. And without going into all of the details here, what we end up with is one beast. We're told that he has 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 crowns, diadems, and blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, feet like a bear's, mouth like a lion, and the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority. Now, some of this imagery about the leopard and bear and lion's mouth, some of that imagery kind of reflects things that we find in Ezekiel and things that we find in Daniel. So again, get used to these references back to the Hebrew Bible. This is another example. Somebody raised this question last time about, well, what about here? It's 7. The number 7 is supposed to be holy, but the dragon has 7, heads. Well, sometimes the numbers are symbolic. One way, and sometimes they're not. One way to look at this is to say, is the writer trying to tell us something about the 7 horns and such, that these are the emperors of Rome? Remember, all these references to the city, Babylon, and all that, it's Rome they're talking about. And so, are we talking about a series of emperors? That's a possibility. Another possibility is that this is the, what you would, like the way Antichrist is, this is the anti-holy, the anti-number. Where 7 is God's number, the holy number. Well, here, this is like blasphemy. This is like idolatry. This is like taking the holy number and making it ugly. So there are different ways to look at this. This beast is given the power and the throne. So the suggestion is this beast, like Rome, has come from the sea, the way the Romans would go out from Rome and they would hit the shoreline and their armies would attack, and this is Rome conquering other nations, Rome in all its power. So this is kind of the emperor. The second beast that we meet in verse 11, we're told that this other beast comes out of the earth. It has two horns like a lamb, and it speaks like a dragon, like the dragon, and it exercises authority of the first beast on its behalf. And so this seems to be more like the cult of the emperor, the worship of the emperor. In the ancient world, during this time, the emperors forced people to worship them as gods, and so they are seen as gods. There's an emperor cult, just the way there's a cult to Zeus or a cult to Diana or whatever. There's a cult, a worship place, a shrine, and a place to worship the emperors themselves. And so we have the emperor and we have the cult of the emperor, the priest, we might say, that worships the emperor. We also have a reference in chapter 13 to this beast that has been wounded. He suffered a mortal wound, but he's lived. He survived. Now, what's going on there? Well, this is where we get into that wonderful thing about 666. In the ancient world, Nero was an emperor who, at a certain point in time, he actually burns the city of Rome in order to rebuild it, and he blames it on the Christians. And it's one of the reasons Christians get persecuted during Nero's reign. Is that he blamed them for the burning of Rome that he himself did. Nero's reign doesn't end well, and he in essence dies, commits suicide. But there are those who say, did you see the body? Did you see the body? Is he really dead? You know how when Kennedy was shot, there were some people who said he's out there somewhere, that they may have been able to save him. They took him off to the hospital. Maybe he's being kept alive, and maybe they're waiting for technology to emerge that could save his life, and he may come back one day. Well, that's what they were saying about Nero. He died, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he's out there somewhere. Maybe he's somewhere out there amassing an army, and Nero is going to come back. And so when we talk about the notion of this one who's one of the seven, but he died, but wait a minute, he may come back. They're talking about the imagery of Nero. Well, Nero, however, is long gone by the time this book is written. But Nero is that symbol. Nero is the symbol of the persecuting emperor, the symbol of the one who blames Christians for things and persecutes them. And so Nero is the way we use the word Hitler today, just, kind of as the symbol of the bad guy, well, in the same way, they use the word Nero back, meaning Christians would have used Nero that way. And the thing about the 666 is that if there's something called a process called gematria. And gematria is a process where in Greeks didn't have numbers, they used letters for numbers. And so the letter alpha meant 1, beta meant 2, and then when you get to 10, you'd start going 10, 20, 30, 40. When you get to 90, the next letter means 100, 200, that kind of thing, until you run out of letters. And then what you did then is you could take a name. I mean, any of us could do this right now. We could take our names and figure out the gematria, is what this is called. Figure out how the letters of our name would add up. And so we could go around saying, hey, 762, how's it going? You know? Hey, 501, nice to see you today. You see, it's easy to take the name and turn it into a number.
Please spell that word, please.
Gematria, Gematria.
Thank you.
And so it's easy to take the name and turn it into a number. But if all you got's the number, I mean, there are countless possibilities. But there are clues here. And at the end of this, it says, this calls for wisdom. The end of chapter 13, verse 18. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. All right. Now, you can imagine scholars have written dissertations trying to figure out what this means, and there are various possibilities, but Nero is such a good possibility because of this reference to the mortal wound and surviving, and because if you take the letters of Nero Caesar, and you add them up in the Hebrew characters, you get 666. But wait a minute, there's an alternate way to spell that name. And if you spell it in the alternate, you get 616. The reason that's important is because there is a variant reading in some of the manuscripts that doesn't say 666, but 616. And so consequently, again, the variant reading says, you know what? This is additional reason to think they're talking about Nero here. And again, they're not talking about the literal Nero, they're talking about the figurative Nero. Nero as, for our purposes, Nero is Hitler. So, that's kind of where we are at this point. That's not proof, but it's a pretty darn good explanation that makes sense of a lot of things, and it fits the way the book works, it fits the interpretation of the book, it fits the genre of the book. So for my purposes, that's a pretty good explanation of that 666 and the beast.
If we were Philippine, it wouldn't be Hitler, it would be Dojo. Or any place else in the world at a different time, it'd be somebody else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good point. At different points in time, it would be different heinous, from our perspective, heinous characters. These are heroes for the other side, but yeah. Okay, we're about out of time. Any comments, questions, Pastor, any thoughts you want to share as we wrap it up for today? Yes.
Why is this whole book done in all these symbolisms and characters and all this? Why couldn't they just write down what they wanted us to know, like point A, B, C, okay, you got bad guys, this, yeah, instead of doing all this?
Well, yeah.
Why is all that done?
Why do poets write poetry instead of prose? You know, why don't you just say the sky is blue, period, instead of
that's me.
doing all this
Point B.
Well, I'm saying there's a reason for it. You know, each form of literature has a purpose, and this kind of literature is couching things in figurative language, in part because if the book is captured, if I'm captured holding the book and somebody's going, is this anti-Roman stuff? You got, no, it's kind of this fantasy I've been working on, or having fun reading.
I've been
this
smoking
thing.
that stuff.
Yeah. And so, the symbols, and there are layers of meaning. You know, if you say something just straight out, you don't always allow for the levels of meaning. The symbolism, drawing back on other things, makes the text richer and has more of an evocative effect. It's just more powerful. So I think there's a reason it's not just, what he's trying to do is get his people to be faithful and courageous in the midst of very hard times.
And so modern people make modern connections and get a sense that if God is with that ancient world, he may be with me now, and I can dare to continue in the midst of it.
Yeah. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. Next week, we move into chapter 14, and we'll start.
2 weeks.
Next week.
I'm sorry, next time, I say. Next time, which will be, well,
There's no Sunday and New Year's,
so it's
Christmas
the third
in July.
week from now. So it's not the next 2 Sundays, but the Sunday after.
What's the symbolism of missing 2 Sundays in a row?
Yeah. Dualism, see. Yin and yang. Good point. 2 in a row. Yeah. And Mike, you're so helpful. Yeah. I'm going to put you and Tom in corners.
Well, you said I was 144,001, but the thing is, I've always heard that when you get to heaven, you may be surprised who's there. And you may also be surprised who's not there.
That's right. That's right.
So you better be careful with that.